Olha só esse processo aqui, galera, que é interessante pra gringa. É uma entrevista por vídeo. Então é uma entrevista técnica, só que em vez de ser um cara falando comigo, é um vídeo. Aí ele faz uma pergunta, eu gravo um vídeo respondendo. Então, vou vestir uma camiseta ali, né? Ó, são algumas questões limitadas por tempo, a gente não pode regravar os vídeos, né? As questões em vídeo, né? Então, se vestir, né, profissionalmente, gravar toda a entrevista no mesmo dia, né? Responder as questões em inglês. E pegar um ponto para ter uma boa iluminação, né? Tal, né? Interessante, mano. Eles querem que você responda de memória sem consultar, né? Show. Como é que eu faço para poder participar da entrevista? Clica aqui. Então vou vestir uma roupa, né, mano? Vestir uma roupa. Agora eu vou tentar fazer uns vlogs estilo Sam Sullivan, né? Obviamente que esse vlog aqui eu não posso. Ele vai. Vocês estão vendo aí? Já faz tempo, galera. Passou isso aqui, né? Faz tempo, mas. Só pra ter uma noção, né? De como é que são esses processos aí pro exterior, né? E eu acho bom, acho bem legal isso. Você, em vez de ter um horário, uma coisa síncrona, é um negócio assíncrono. Só vai te fazer umas perguntas, você grava uns vídeos, responde e manda pra eles, tá ligado? Amor, vem cá, segura aqui pra mim a câmera, por favor. Um minutinho, eu vou pôr minha camiseta aqui. Nossa, eu encomendei 3 camisetas dessa, ainda não fui. Já faz mais de um ano que eu encomendei, ainda não fui lá buscar. Tô precisando ir lá. Eu tenho que dar um jeito de... Eu já até sei o que eu vou fazer. Eu vou mandar o meu... pessoa que faz o serviço pra nós aí de transportes poder ir lá buscar pra nós essas camisetas. Então, vou vestir a camiseta aqui. Tô vestido formalmente agora. Vamos lá para essa entrevista aí, né? Acende a luz pra mim, fazendo favor.
Se precisar, eu tenho uma de manga aí, você quer?
Vamos deixar ela...
Eu tenho uma de bacon cake, quer?
Não, assim tá bom. Isso aqui é o meu...
Amor,
É o meu estilo profissional.
você vai na academia?
Hum?
Você vai na academia hoje?
Não.
Ó.
Não, vou na academia.
Então tá.
Então vamos lá, vamos para a entrevista, que não tá falando quanto tempo demora, né? Seria bom se tivesse um aviso aqui, né? Processo de certificação. Então vamos ver aqui, ó. Entrevista Java, versão 2 em Full Stack. Vamos ver a introdução.
Hello and welcome. My name is Kristen Nielsen, Director of Recruiting at Full Stack Labs. You've officially embarked on the next phase of our recruiting process, which is our recorded video submissions. As you click through the prompts below, you'll be given a list of questions, and for each question, you'll be asked to record a video response. Your responses will be used to assess your candidacy, so it's important that you consider your audience and provide all relevant details to paint the full picture. Answering in high-level or vague responses will be considered incomplete. Hiring teams will then use your responses to evaluate your skills for problem-solving capabilities and job-specific skills. So please, take your time, provide relevant details, and you will do great. Best of luck. We look forward to your submission. Thanks!
Ok, thanks. Então vamos lá. Conectei o fone aqui. Vou poder ouvir no fone, né? E aí vocês vão saber só minhas respostas, né, mano? Cadê? Tá aqui, ó. Deixa eu ver se tá no fone já. Ótimo. Então vamos lá. Vamos iniciar a entrevista. São 9 perguntas aqui. Acesso da câmera. Permitir todos os acessos. Ok, let's go. Aqui tem uma tela para colocar, né? Alô, alô, alô. Som, som. Alô, 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 alô. Som. Alô, som, som. Alô, som, som, som. Testando o microfone, né? Vamos lá, começando a entrevista. Câmera ligada. lá. Você pode se apresentar, dizer onde você mora, né? Algo sobre você que você gosta de fazer no seu tempo livre. Tá bom. 1 minuto. Hi, my name is Cristiano. I'm from Brazil, the state of São Paulo. I have 2 houses, one at São Paulo city, capital of the state, and another on another city, about 100 kilometers away, 1 hour of travel by car, okay? And I like to do a lot of things on my free time. I play some instruments. I try to make rock songs. So I play guitar, drums, bass, try to sing too. I like to travel. I like to get my car and put on the road. I like fitness, to swim, to run my bicycle. So those are mainly things I like to do. And of course I love to spend time with my family too. Próxima pergunta. Então aqui eles estão pedindo um vídeo de 3 minutos para dar uma overview, né, de alto nível, né, de habilidades, experiência ao longo da nossa carreira, né, quais os projetos que eu já trabalhei, descrever as tecnologias que eu já trabalhei, né, os times, os papéis e responsabilidades. Ok, vamos lá. Okay, well, I work as a software developer since 2007, and during this period of time, I always has been a Java developer and worked with multiple different kinds of solutions using Java technology. I like always to mention a big project I did about 12 years ago. At the time I was not a senior yet, but I had some experience already, and that was a great experience because I had the opportunity to work on a project from the beginning until the end. You know, there were no system. Then we draw the system on paper and show it to the customer, the final user, I mean, and they use the final user approved that screens. Then we developed a functional prototype, then all the phase of the development, you know. I could participate on this project since the beginning until the delivery point of it. It was a JSF project at the time. That was a pretty new technology we had, and I was part of a team. We were 7 developers, okay, and it was amazing to be part of this team where we built the system from the scratch until production. And then once it was on production, I was part of the team that did maintenance and bug fixes on this team. So it was a great opportunity to see the building of a software from the scratch until it was completely done and available for final users. This was one good experience I had. Another one I like to mention is international opportunity at IBM for Sprint and T-Mobile, the mobile operators from United States, where I had the opportunity to work on a global team. The first project I mentioned it took about 2 years, and this newer one on IBM, it talks about 2 years too. But what this project has to introduce on my career, that it was the first time I had the experience of working on a global team. And I liked very much the experience. At the time, most of the team were people from India, and our work was to do small changes on a lot of different Java systems, both new and old. So that was a great opportunity too. E vamos para a próxima pergunta. Desafios, feature, iniciativa. 4 minutos. Tá, nos últimos anos, não. Ah, tá. Qual foi a feature mais desafiadora que eu já trabalhei, né? Saquei, pô, agora eu preciso pensar um pouco nisso aí. Ok. Well, the most challenging feature I had worked on the past 2 years Well, I guess it was on that project at IBM. We had a feature there which was to update the Angular version of the project from version 4 until version 12. And why was that challenging to me? Well, as a mainly a Java developer, in Java world it's not common to update the systems we built. So on this occasion, it was a little strange for me to update a system, you know, that's not common in Java. But as I could see in Angular, it's more common, so there are some tools available to do that job. But even with those tools, it was challenging because the Angular application was huge. We had a lot of functionalities and a lot of screens, you know, a lot of very particular things. So on this feature, I had to, it was not a feature, but you know, it was a task I had to implement. I faced a lot of challenges because when I upgraded the Angular from one version to another, maybe I had to test the entire application and find bugs and go out to see how to fix them. So that was the most challenging feature I worked at the past 2 years. But one very difficult feature I worked on my career, it was not 2 years ago, it was about 7 years ago. It was at a telecom company from Brazil. The challenge was to process a lot of data using parallel processing. So we used Spring XG, which is a framework of Spring, and there we had to implement by hand a lot of controls and redundancies and flows. So that was a difficult task to be done. In order to achieve it, I had to study deeply the functionality of Spring XG to know the features and all the capabilities of Spring XG in order to accomplish it. So I guess those are 2 cases that I remember now where I had complex features and those experiences became memory. So I remember of them until today. Ó, velho, me chamaram aqui bem no meio do trem, deixa eu ver. Aqui, deixa eu responder o Teams aqui. Então, vamos lá. Agora outra aqui, código de muita qualidade, né? Como é que eu entrego um código de alta qualidade, limpo, né? E manutenível. Olha, essa questão é boa, hein, mano? 3 minutinhos. Well, in order to deliver a high quality code, I try to, when I work at a company, to learn the principles and the code style the company likes to use. For instance, recently I worked at a company which was Java 17. So there they were very focused on how do you call that way of programming? It is declarative programming. So in some cases, instead of using ifs and fors, they do prefer to use ternary operators and for each's, map, reduce, streams, features like that. So in this company, I had to write code this way. But before this company, I was at another one which did prefer to use ifs, else's, and fors for loops. So one thing I try to understand, the first thing in fact I try to understand when I join a new company is to learn those preferences on the code style they do prefer. and I try to configure the tools once they are available. For instance, we can configure on Eclipse the autosave actions in order to format imports every time I save the class. Some companies has a predefined style sheet, let's say, for the code, and on Eclipse we can import this style sheet so the Eclipse auto formats the code every time. Well, I try to use one strategy where I limit my methods to one screen. So if I have a method that is bigger than one screen, I try to break it down meaningfully, of course, trying not to just break the code. I try to break in methods that make sense in order to have a readable code. So a readable code usually is easier to implement tests using JUnit. So I guess it's a brief of what I do in order to have a many table code, high quality and clean. Ok, a próxima questão aqui, vamos ver. O que é o Spring, né? Ou um framework Java similar que eu estou familiarizado, né? Quais são os principais features e como essas features trabalham juntos e como os desenvolvedores usam. Tá bom, mano, eu acho que o Spring é o cara aí pra gente responder essa questão, tá ligado? Okay, I guess that Spring is a good candidate to explain, since it's a thing I use very much on my activities. Well, Spring is a very comprehensive framework. In fact, Spring is a family of frameworks, so we have different Spring frameworks inside the Spring family. The most used one is Spring Boot, Spring Security, Spring Data, and on those three, I guess that the only, as a full stack developer, or even a backend developer, the Spring framework which I interact and customize more is Spring Data, because when we have Spring Boot, it comes from, I'm joining a company, for instance. This company has already a project built in Spring, so I don't configure Spring Boot on my day-by-day. The same for Spring Security, but Spring Data is a place where I always have to do more modifications and do customizations in order to achieve the goals of my task, So how I would describe deeply the Spring Data. Spring Data is an object relational mapping framework of the Spring, and what it does is, as the name suggests, it maps Java classes and objects to database tables. That's very briefly what Spring Data does. It's a successor of Hibernate and implementation of JPA. One great advantage of using Spring Data is that it has a lot of default methods that you can use without having to re-implement. For instance, you have the save, the delete, the update, which is pretty much the save. You have some ways of auto-generating queries with Spring Data too. Find by name, so you pass the name, it's all you have to write. But you can go deeper in configurations. For instance, writing native queries to improve the performance of your system when you have a situation where you have a lot of tables, a lot of joins, which is very common when you are working with reports, for instance. So I guess Spring Data is the most used one. We configure it using annotations, so the code is very clean at the end. You have easy to understand code. You don't have a lot of configurations files, so I like too much Spring. Acabou o tempo de responder, né, no meio. Próxima pergunta. Qual a diferença entre uma classe abstrata e uma interface, né? Porque o Java tem ambos os conceitos, quando a gente deve usar um e o outro. Essa aqui tá barbada. Well, the difference between an abstract class and an interface is that on abstract classes we can have properties and we can have some default implementation of methods, and on interfaces we can only have the signature of methods. So, but on newer versions of Java interface you can have default implementations too for some of your methods. So this is one of the difference between one and another, but an abstract class, as it is a class and not an interface, in Java you can only extend one parent class. So you cannot extend two abstract classes at your own class. So that's one important difference. So when you are writing an abstract class, the child of that class will only be child of that class. When you have an interface, you can implement how many interfaces you need. So one class can implement multiple different interfaces. So that's a difference between those two. When it comes to an abstract class, you cannot use it directly without a child. You need a child to use the abstract class, or at least you need to implement those methods inline, but that's not a good practice to use abstract classes. What I mean is that you cannot do a new on an abstract class as you do on a concrete one. And all the methods that you have on the abstract class that are not implemented, you have to implement them on your final class that extends the abstract class. The same for interface, okay? So just to, when you should use one over the other, I guess the main difference is this: when you need to have more than one implementation, you need a class that implements multiple interfaces, then you go using interface. When it's a situation where your class will only extend one interface, then one abstract class, then you use the abstract class. In projects, it is common to have abstract class to build CRUDs, for instance, né? And interfaces to more generic things. É pouco tempo, vai, para responder isso aqui. Caralho, subclasses, throwables. Quais são as 3 maiores subclasses de throwable? Exception, runtime and error. Caralho, velho. E como as exceções checadas e não checadas são diferentes uma das outras. Quais são as 3? Exception, runtime, exception and error. Ok. Well, when it comes to throwable classes, you have this, some of those classes are throwables, which means they are not checked exception, so you simply throw them, but you don't need to verify if they are thrown. For instance, when you have verified exception, checked exceptions, in fact, you need to implement a catch for that exception or even a throws at your method. But when you have just a throw, let me say by examples here, you may have, for instance, a security exception. Security exception, you have to check it to see if it's being thrown. So you need a catch or a throws. Another exception you can have is a runtime exception. The runtime exception is one that may occur and you are not obligated to have a catch or even declare that at your method. So that's not a verified exception. And so this is pretty much the difference between them. When you ask about the measure subclass of throwable, so you have exception, runtime exception, and error. So that's a part of the question. I don't know how to respond to this. But the difference between checked and unchecked exception is this. When you have a checked exception, you have to explicitly declare, you are obligated to declare the code should reach that. Unless if you don't do this, your code won't compile. And when you have unchecked exception, you don't need to implement. You are not obligated to implement. So you can have a generic catch exception if you want to prevent the occurrence of runtime exceptions. Isso aqui também foi difícil, hein, mano? Aí, estamos aqui na penúltima pergunta. Quais são as mais performance issues no Java, as mais comuns e como a gente identifica a causa desses problemas de performance, né? Contar de uma vez que a gente identificou e resolveu um problema de performance. Ah, finalmente uma questãozinha fácil. É a penúltima aqui, 3 minutos para responder, é pouco, hein? Okay, well, as a Java EE developer, it is very common to have performance problems related with database access. So in my career, most of the problems I had were related to this. One of the first problems I had with performance, it was at very old times. We had a Tomcat server and we had the connection to the database. It was overflowing the connection pool. So it was a situation where connections were opened using JDBC, the most old way to do that. And we opened the connection, we run the query, but we did not, for some reason, close the connection. So that was the issue at this time, and we had to use finalies on all the DAO methods in order to close the connection. So this is one situation. Another thing very common, Puff using Hibernate, and more recently using Spring Data. It is to having, I think I mentioned some questions before this. When you have a report or even a screen that access multiple tables and do multiple joins, so the performance goes down if you use the ORM auto-generated code. So you have ways to address that. For instance, on Hibernate, you can use lazy loads in order to prevent the entire object to be loaded at the first time. But another good way to do that is having native queries implemented. So instead of using the auto-generated query from the framework, you yourself implements the custom native query or even a stored procedure depending on the database you use. Of course, you can use to database index in order to boost the query performance. So in my experience, on this corporative way of developing enterprise application of Java, the most problem we had related to performance is database access. And the way to address this depends on the framework and the implementations. But in most of cases, using native query is a good way to boost the performance of this part of the system. A última questão, cobertura de testes automatizados. Qual a sua filosofia e experiência com testes automatizados, né? Como a gente consegue uma cobertura adequada, né, do Codebase, especificar as nuances entre Vitro Low Value Tests e Resilient High Value Tests. Olha, isso eu não sei não o que eu tô falando aqui, mas vamos lá. Okay, when it comes to automated test coverage, in my experience, I always use JUnit as the automated test framework. And to do coverage, when I'm building a functionality from the scratch, I try to use TDD as the development approach. So I write the test code before the actual code, and this is a good way to have it pre-tested. Even before developing, I'm doing the tests. But another situation I came across along my career was situations where I had to write automated code to test existing codes. So this situation is harder because it always involves a lot of mocks and things like that. And sometimes the requirement is not clear. So you don't have documentation, you only have the code and the target coverage. To achieve that, I use it to have breakpoints on the code I'm testing in order to inspect variables and discover the expected values for each situation in order to achieve the desired coverage on the code. So those are the main practices I use on my day by day. And one good tactical in order to write good code is try to test the frontier values. For instance, if I'm testing a situation that matters if a number is positive or negative, I try to test with 0, with -1, and 1 positive. So those are the frontiers value, being the -1, the value that is a negative that is more closely to the border, 0 is the border, and 1 is the first positive number. I could test 2, 3, 4, but when I test 1, since it's very close to 0, most of the situations that goes wrong when I have this approach, they break the test if the code is not well written. So I guess that's a good practice to write a good test. Acabou. Caralho, essa foi difícil, mano. Tem umas 2 ou 3 questões aqui que olha, tinha uma aqui que eu... Todas elas sabia, mas tinha uns detalhezinhos que eu não sabia, né, mano? Então tá fazendo aqui o upload das respostas. Essa aí foi a entrevista, não sei, eu devo ter gasto aí uns 20 minutos. Entrevista técnica falada aqui. Não tinha ninguém falando aqui, era só texto. As perguntas são em texto, mas eu tenho que responder falando, tá ligado? Então agora só falta mais um outro teste, né? Eu fiz primeiro um teste de cognição e personalidade. Aí eu fiz essa entrevista técnica e depois agora, uma hora que eu tiver um tempinho, né? Tô aqui, tirei uns minutinhos aqui do trabalho para fazer isso aqui. Quando eu tiver um tempinho eu vou fazer o outro, que é um teste num ambiente simulado, né? Então, mas legal, né? Bom assim, eu não falei com ninguém. Quando a gente fala com alguém é mais leve, fica mais tranquilo, porque às vezes você pode perguntar ali, eu falo, não, mas o que você quer dizer com isso? Eu entendi isso, é isso mesmo, né? Agora assim, só responder as questões você fica meio vendido, né? Eles falaram aqui para não consultar nada, eu não consultei, só fui respondendo aí da minha cachola, que eu lembrava, né? E vamos ver, mano. Tomara que dê certo, né?